Welcome to Protecting the Legacy, a show sponsored by the Boutique Cigar Association. Grab a cigar and your favorite beverage and join us for the next hour as we tackle some of the most difficult topics in our industry. Now, please join your hosts, Kerr Viajante, Armin Caprellian, and Dr. Gabby Caffey as we dive into this week's hot topics.
Hola, brothers and sisters. In the boutique cigar land, this is Protecting the Legacy. El Viajante here, and I'm with my main man, Armin. How you doing, buddy?
Fantastic. I've been like a caged animal all day. I've been anxiously awaiting tonight. I'm very excited that once again we have Executive Director of the CRA, the one and only Glynn Loope, and I know there's a lot to cover tonight, so I'm just amped to get the whole thing going.
Well, you got to put a window in that wood behind you. That's the reason why you feel like a caged animal, Armin. That lovely background.
I think maybe that's it.
It is. And we have the man, the myth, the legend, Don Gabby Caffey. How you doing, Doc?
Hey, guys. Good evening. Happy Friday night. Tonight we've got a very special guest. I think, I see Mr. Glynn Loope like the head coach of our football team. He's just the guy that 6 years ago when I met him here in the office that I used to share with the Reyes family, gosh, man, he ignited a passion in me about the cigar industry, the premium cigar industry that it just never turned off. It just got stronger and stronger, and everything he does and everything that he's done for the premium cigar industry the past 12 years has been so vital. He's like... whenever there's a question, a problem, a concern, he's the first one on my list, So when the news came out a couple months ago that Mr. Glynn Loope was stepping down from CRA as the executive director, I got to be honest with you, man, that was like I'll be blunt, that was like a kick in the nuts for me. And I know for you guys too, a lot of concerns were shared, and a lot of people have a lot of questions and concerns as to, okay, where do we sit? It's July 17th. FDA substantial equivalence goes into effect less than 2 months from today. Actually, 2 months roughly. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Honduras just announced today that they're shutting down for the next 2 weeks because of the COVID virus getting worse in Dunley.
Wow.
So we wanted to have Mr. Glynn Loope on tonight to really... and I know a lot of what's going on behind the scenes and in front of the scenes because I just stay actively informed. But I think it's important that we have him on to talk about the state of affairs of the premium cigar industry, not just CRA, PCA, the lobby groups, everything that's going on, even the furlough. Let's talk about everything tonight. So welcome, Glynn Loope. It's a pleasure to have you on. Always, always good to see you, my friend.
Thank you, Gabby. It's great to be back, and it seems like it was just a month ago, but
yeah.
But this is the proverbial notion that a day is a lifetime in the life of a politician, and every day's an adventure. Every day is different, and that's what I love about what we do.
Well, before we go any further, I just noticed Senor Carlito Fuente I'm here, but had lots of trouble trying to join. So we'll try to address that as we're doing the show because we'd absolutely love to have him on.
Well, that's why I wore my Casa Fuente hat.
There it is.
There it is, yeah.
It's a bar in Las Vegas. Wish we were there this week.
That's right. PCA week this week.
Yeah.
So Glenn, we everybody has a platform nowadays to go live and talk about, their opinions about where we're at as a cigar industry. I've had the great pleasure of not just staying informed, but, my phone ringing and being asked to participate in some of the things going on to help exempt or help alleviate the regulations on premium cigars. And how do we start this? Let's go into a systematic fashion. The other day we got a great email from you that kind of went into detail as to where we started in 2016 and where we're at now. And I think a lot of people, because they're uninformed, don't really realize the importance of what CRA brings to the table as well as PCA. you guys, like the premium cigar industry is a heart, and you guys are the coronary arteries to this heart. If we close one of them off, that's it. The industry shuts down. So help us. Where do we start? Where do we start to educate people as to 2016, the lawsuit was filed, and kind of what did the lawsuit accomplish for the industry?
Well, do you want to start with the lawsuit, or do you want to start with
I think you
start where you think is best.
Yeah, thank you.
Once upon a time,
a small town.
First of all, let's tee this up just a little bit by saying this from the outset: the sky is not falling. Everybody is on the job, and the last couple of weeks, there's been so much cigar media narrative about the PCA furloughs, about what am I getting for my dollar, the advocacy effort, is it over? Oh dear God! And it was gloom and doom, and it was on seemingly every cigar media broadcast I turned on to, which is a lot.
Yes.
And if I could get any message across tonight, it's that the sky is not falling. Everybody's on the job. There's committed staff in both organizations. The manufacturers, the consumers, the retailers of America are being served well. And we're going to get that point across if we get anything across during this discussion, gentlemen. And we've got ample detail to fill in the blanks on that. So before I get into, the litigation and the politics and all that sort of thing, I want to emphasize this industry is no different than any other trade association or special interest group in Washington, D.C. or in this country right now. Just like the private sector is going through the trials and tribulations that they are as a result of the pandemic, so are trade groups. 3,000 trade groups, 3,000. Signed a joint letter to Congress trying to get eligible for PPP assistance from the Small Business Administration. Trade groups, because Congress didn't let special interest groups, especially those that do over 50% of the work in politics, to be eligible for that type of assistance. What does it tell you when 3,000 trade groups want that type of assistance? The National Rifle Association laid off 60 to 80 people. I could go through a laundry list of trade organizations through the Washington media that are going through the exact same thing. So I'm not privy to what the PCA board did, but I'm sure they had very, very good reasons to do what they did. And we saw this week that Scott Pierce and Josh Habersky
That's right.
are back on the job. Not a beat was missed. Even in the wake of the announcement of that, those guys were in the office and working diligently for this, not knowing what the future held. My staff has been on full time. All of our consultants are on, the ones working the Democrats, the ones working the Republicans, the ones working the Trump administration. We're not missing a beat. And I think what occurred on July 25th that you were involved with, Gabby, is completely indicative of this.
Yes.
You were a part of a group, and I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but I wanted to set the stage by saying all is well. But July 25th, the PCA and the CRA did a joint session with the Food and Drug Administration, and Dr. Caffey was a part of that group, as was George Padron, as was Carlito Fuente, as was Drew Newman, as was Greg Zimmerman and John Anderson, and for the PCA and our respective staff. And you gave a presentation on the public health implications, the demographic characteristics, the burdensome level of impact that items like the substantial equivalence mandate will have on this industry. You were able to convey that to the FDA, including Mitch Zeller, the director of the Center for Tobacco Products at the FDA. And that was just a matter of July 25th, for Pete's sake. It was an excellent follow-up session. And by the way, for the listening public, that session was facilitated by the president's own Small Business Administration. they're the ones that facilitated it. They're the ones that made the request on behalf of the industry. The President's Small Business Administration has been a diligent supporter of this industry going back to the Obama administration. It was the SBA under the Obama administration that wrote the original letter to the FDA and to the White House that said, if you regulate in the fashion you have proposed, you will wipe out 50% of this industry. And they said that while President Obama was in office, and they've been just as diligent ever since. They've hosted listening sessions at SBA headquarters, where once again, John Anderson and Drew Newman very eloquently spoke on behalf of this industry in a live public forum with staff of the FDA in the room when they did it. You guys reiterated that message on the 25th. And there's a lot of wheels in motion within the administration that we'll talk about later. But the fact that that meeting took place just on the 25th of this month, June
25th, yeah.
I keep saying July, forgive me, June 25th, is reflective of the commitment and the angles being worked by this industry to get its message across to this administration. So I hope that positions that were not unique in what happened.
Let me say something, Glenn, because this is so important, right? The message that is being conveyed. You know, we have PCA and CRA, and everyone says, well, why do we need so many organizations, right? And when we created the Boutique Cigar Association, we wanted to create a voice for small producers. I'm talking small family-owned manufacturers. And the fact that we were invited to be in that meeting, a private meeting with Mitch Zeller, the head of, the Center for Tobacco Products, to really express, how many companies are going to suffer, what the sequela is going to be of these regulations that are coming up in September. That just shows the beautiful equal playing field that you guys are representing everybody in the industry, not just big companies, but small companies as well. Right. Now, the thing that I have problem with is that there's a lot of lethargy. Let me use simpler words, right? There's a lot of small companies that don't want to get up and pull their own weight and participate and get informed. And just because they're not participating and they're not getting informed doesn't mean that nothing is happening. There's a lot happening. And I'm a witness to that. And my guys here, Kerry and Armin, are day-to-day informed as to what CRA is doing, the level of participation that we've been granted. And I appreciate that so much, because I think we're the first ones to go are going to be us. And they need to know that.
Well, let's put it in a broader perspective even, and you're absolutely right, but let's put it in an even broader perspective. At this particular juncture in the political life of this industry, everybody has a voice now. Everybody. Right. And I mean from the big ones to the small ones. The CAA has its role to play. And we all know about the role of Davidoff Swisher, Altadas General, and other companies that are part of the CAA. They have their role to play. They have their legitimate role to play. They attack certain issues from the angles that is a part of their political agenda.
Yes.
Retail Association through the PCA has their issues that they are concerned about politically. And through the CRA and the Boutique Association, we have all spectrums of the complete spectrum of the cigar industry amply represented. The point that I want to drive home on that is that where is it written that we all have to get along and agree all the time? All the time. That's the nature of the political process. Let everybody fight it out and see where the political chips fall. And that's the reason we shouldn't get on hyperdrive when we talk about issues like flavors and the internet and taxation and all. Issues can divide industries, but they don't have to divide them permanently, and they don't have to divide them to the very core of their being. And by that I mean we can agree one day and disagree the next. I read a piece where Glenn Wolfson was quoted as saying, that they participate in the political process. They absolutely do. Everybody's got a way to get their voice across. But the premium handmade side of this industry has a very specific story to tell. The family-owned businesses of this industry have a very specific story to tell. There's nothing wrong within this industry to have that type of separation, if you will, differences of opinion. Just because it's unique and different doesn't mean anybody is specifically wrong. And this whole notion that we're all, if we don't all agree on the exact same political agenda, we're all screwed as an industry. Well, that's not true. There's ample examples of industries across the economic spectrum.
Yes.
And I take craft beer and big beer as a classic example of where they agree on certain things, overarching issues. And craft beer says, no, well, we've got some very specific political issues we're concerned about. Well, they fight those out and let the political chips fall where they may.
But
Cigar is not any different than that.
I do have a question about that, Glynn, because you bring up a great point, and I've heard people ask a question about that, where, you know, when we're looking at premium cigars and differentiating a premium cigar, and you have all these different groups fighting for their, you know, rights. The concern is that if someone is fighting the FDA and pushing back, that the premium cigars will get lumped in with cigars that are not deemed premium, whether they're you know, the short filler chopped cellophane, you know, aluminum cellophane sold in gas stations, especially when it comes to like the warning labels, where something like that just automatically kind of lumps us all back in together again. So how would that be a differentiating? Maybe you could explain that and talk to that, because I've had a few people talk to me about that and ask me about that.
That's why CRA tells the story that it does. That's why we specifically talk about premium, handmade, long filler, made by hand cigars, as opposed to other products. We've been trying to get the point across to the FDA. They would love nothing more than a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
And when I say one-size-fits-all, I mean one-size-fits-all, including this.
Right.
I mean one-size-fits-all for tobacco. And we'll get into warning labels and all that kind of thing a little bit later. But if you're a bureaucracy, nothing makes you happier than a one-size-fits-all approach. Mm-hmm. Well, not all cigars are the same. So perhaps some cigar sectors ought to be regulated in this fashion, and other cigar sectors ought to be regulated in this fashion. And frankly, others ought to be exempt totally, because the school of thought as to why they are included in the first place doesn't apply. When Congress debated the Tobacco Control Act, they zeroed in on a handful of things: youth access, chemical addiction, and mortality. And we have clearly demonstrated that premium handmade cigars don't fit into that little cluster of reasons that Congress passed the Tobacco Control Act, for Pete's sake. We know that because of the lack of inhalation, the lack of addiction, the lack of mortality, and the lack of youth access, that we shouldn't be treated the same as other tobacco products. And frankly, there's a lot of other pieces of the tobacco world that have reinforced that message with us. But that's why we exist, to tell that message to a bureaucracy that's never heard that message before.
Well, Glynn, we had a comment here that said short filler is still a premium cigar.
Okay.
And I know with
and our exemption legislation would provide for that.
So short filler, because he's saying short filler is a premium cigar. Premium cigars are all cigars without chemical flavor infusion in them, et cetera, et cetera.
You know, we get into that more when we talk about in the context of convenience store market types of mass market cigars versus what we're smoking here tonight.
Right.
And the FDA obviously has a target on the back of anything that meets that criteria that you would call mass market. Well, not all short filler are mass market products. Right. And that's the reason companies like the Newmans have done such an eloquent job of getting that point across on behalf of their company. And no one's been better at that. They've got a very unique story to tell. And it's proper and good that the FDA is hearing that story. And that's the reason the Newmans have been so intricately involved in this political process. They have a unique story to tell. They have a unique set of products. And their point is just as valid as anybody else's, that they shouldn't be treated and regulated in the same fashion as other products.
Because I think this has really evolved.
If I may also add, on many occasions, as Dr. Gabbia so eloquently relayed the I guess the scientific approach of the difference between a premium cigar and a cigarette, the effects of nicotine, how premium cigars are handmade, not machine made, etc. I'm sure you've read it many times over. He's presented this argument time and time again. He's been to Washington. I know a lot of correspondence has been sent to the FDA, and as you mentioned in the early part of the segment, and the names that you mentioned all working together to get the exemption. So with such a short, small window, with the clock ticking as it is, I'd love to get into that aspect of it, because you seem, I guess I would say, cautiously optimistic that that's now resonating with the FDA. If we can just kind of discuss that.
I think it's resonating with the administration.
Yes.
And there's a big difference between the administration and the FDA. We're dealing with entrenched career bureaucrats at the FDA.
Right.
And I think the message is getting across and has been getting across to the Trump administration. And I don't say any of this in a partisan context. We're dealing with political reality here, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But we've had very productive meetings with various offices of the executive branch, from the Office of the Vice President to the Domestic Policy Council to the White House Office of Management and Budget to the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs to the Secretary of Health and Human Services to the SBA. Is that enough for you? That's enough offices of the executive branch to hear this message.
I'd say so.
Loud and clear. And this theme and this issue fits perfectly into this administration's regulatory rollback and regulatory reform economic agenda. The president just did a White House lawn event yesterday on the regulatory reform measures that the administration has taken. Now, let's put this in this context. A lot of people are fond of saying in cigar media that we knew that we would have to work any administration. But let's put it in this context. We're dealing with the political hand of cards that we were dealt. Even this administration has learned the hard way it is not easy to roll back existing final rules.
Right.
Even on some of the most complex and controversial measures you can think of with regard to our national economy, it has taken them, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, this is just political reality that I'm talking about. They have learned how difficult it is to roll back regulations that were finalized under the previous or any previous administration. So we're no different than what the administration has confronted on environmental regulation, on financial services regulation, on manufacturing regulations, on coal, if you want to get that specific, in the energy sector, things that I'm thinking and talking about, things that are public knowledge about this administration that were political priorities of theirs, and they've had to confront the rulemaking process just like we have had to, and our rule was finalized before they came into office, so we're not any different or unique, and nobody could walk in and sprinkle fairy dust and say you're magically not regulated. It just wasn't going to happen. It was going to take the litigation process. It was going to take the political process, even to get us to this juncture that we're at today, which is not a bad place to be. I know we're at the crux of the end of the first term of this administration. Yeah. We have no idea what's going to happen on election night, but we know that there's a window right now to get something that's sustainable, that's predictable, that's standardized, that the industry could perhaps live with in some form or fashion. We don't know, but we hear rumblings, and frankly, I think we've gotten the right vibes. Plus, the litigation has served a worthy purpose to send the right messages to the agency that you can't treat us like you can everything else, for Pete's sake. And we've got ample stacks around me that I'm going to show you visually to substantiate that. But the message is getting across. This wasn't going to be a sprinkle the dust and everything's going to be okay just because you've got an anti-regulatory administration. There's a process to work through, and it is legal and bureaucratic and political. And the PCA and the CRA and CAA have all worked diligently for their respective constituencies as a coalition when it was appropriate to get that message across. And I feel pretty good today as to where we are going into the next several weeks of this administration. And
years ago,
Thank
go
you.
ahead. Years ago, I remember Glenn Loope saying to me that I came from healthcare, right? Healthcare, we were kind of used to being regulated. Carrie, you pharmaceuticals, you understand regulations. A lot of industries years ago, 10, 20, 30 years ago, started to be regulated. And it was a new way of doing business is, getting through regulations, compliance, all those things. I remember when they introduced HIPAA compliance into medical practices, every doctor said, "Oh my God, the sky is falling." And what happens is we're dealing with a new type of language that a lot of cigar makers were not used to. And that's the relevance of Cigar Rights of America. That is why the voice, Glenn, you're not just a person. You're not just a fighter for our industry. You're passionate. I think you really do it for the love, because I know for damn sure you can go somewhere else and get paid a lot more money with the knowledge that you have. But the love that you have for our industry and the voice that you bring to the table and the luxury that you afford us all in that we could focus on our businesses and we can, make blends and sell cigars while you guys are out there fighting for all of us is something that can never be taken for granted. And that's the most important thing I want to say tonight is I'm so grateful to have met you 6 years ago. I have so much value for what you bring to the table, what CRA brings to the table, because I've seen nothing but action from CRA. Why? Because I stay in tune. I ask questions. I try to participate when I can. That's the thing is, if you don't want to participate, if you don't want to get involved, then don't ask, hey, why haven't we done anything? There's a lot going on, but you have to stay informed.
Yeah.
Well, you got to think about where we started from. Zero.
Yeah.
Zero. President Obama signed the Tobacco Control Act in June of 2009, June 9th, I believe it was, 2009. April of 2009, I gave my first industry presentation ever in Miami. And I saw it coming. It was already, the Tobacco Control Act was already creeping its way through the House and the Senate. Let's see. The House passed the bill. The House passed the Tobacco Control Act on April the 2nd. Boy, I'm having a flashback right now because it's all starting. I'm glad I wrote that date down. The House of Representatives passed the Tobacco Control Act on April the 2nd, 2009. April the 9th, we had an industry meeting of 2009 in Miami, my first ever on the job. And Rocky still quotes this line to this day. I stood up in front of them. They didn't know me from Adam. And I stood up in front of them and I said, ladies and gentlemen, S-chip was just practice. S-chip just practice. Because this is coming down the pike and you're going to confront the battle of your life. Because once you give any federal agency the power to do something, they're going to do it.
Yep.
The Senate passed the bill on June the 11th, and the president signed the bill, the 22nd of June of 2009. The first time that they advertised in the Federal Register was April of 2010, that their intent was to come after cigars. Get that. April of 10 was the first time they advertised in the Federal Register their intent. And I said, here they come. Here they come. And through the leadership of Jeff Borshowitz and his partnership with Congressman Bill Posey, that's where legislation going on offense for a change was born to introduce legislation to exempt a specifically and narrowly defined class of premium cigars from FDA oversight. And it gave us a platform to get our message across for the first time in the political history of this industry. First time. And since then, 336 members of the House of Representatives and 34 members of the Senate have signed on to that bill at one time or another through 3 different sessions of Congress. We started from 0 and we went to 336. And in the first session of Congress that it was introduced, we hit the magic number of 220. And if it weren't for being blocked by Big Tobacco and other special interest groups, it would have come up for a vote in the House of Representatives then. And just to prove it wasn't a partisan context, the Tobacco Control Act was passed by a Republican House of Representatives. I say that out of pure ancient history.
Fair enough.
You got friends on the right and friends on the left. You know, I did an interview with the Wall Street Journal one year during Bill Paley's smoke in New York, and I said at the time, you got to put this in the right political context. I told the Journal, I said, we've got to have the only piece of legislation in the United States Congress that's got Charlie Rangel and Michelle Bachmann on the same bill. Must mean we're right, which must mean we're right. We've proven since 2011 that this is not a partisan issue. We have friends on the left, we have friends on the right, we have friends in the middle, and that legislation has served as a platform to get that message across to two administrations. So we make no apologies for that political effort. And by golly, it did in fact pass the full House of Representatives in 2017. That's from an industry that started with nothing politically.
Correct.
I'm ranting. We're going to keep ranting until you come
Wow.
up.
So I'm trying to fill the voids because we're going from a lot of people question. Let me start by saying this, right? In any business, the most expensive thing to do when you introduce a product or you have a product on the market is to educate the consumer about your product. Education is by far the most expensive component of introducing a product to market because you're literally telling people, I've got this product, it's special, this is why you need it, you should buy it, correct? So that's where marketing, advertising, all that thing comes in. Now, the entire premium cigar industry has found itself in a position where we've had to educate the federal government and the FDA as to what a premium cigar is. Now, in my personal opinion, and I'm not speaking for my colleagues here because I don't know if they agree or not, the lawsuit, as expensive as it was, I think it served a great, what's that?
You said is.
Is. The lawsuit, as expensive as it is, I think you guys are going in $6 million now. That's amazing. It's my panties bunch up when I say that. It was literally a course educating our legislative officials, the FDA, as to what and why premium cigars should be treated differently. It did achieve some things that were fantastic. You guys saved the industry millions of dollars. Hundreds of millions of dollars. I remember when we were going to start implementing warning, labeling, and advertising plans.
Yep.
I'm looking at my factory, and we're just kind of like, how the hell do we even attempt? You know, people don't understand that print. Thank you, sir. There you go.
This was the original filing in court.
Unbelievable.
There's your visual aid to show that it's real. It's not my imaginary friend. This is what the industry's been paying for. And Gabby, can I rant about that a little bit?
Yes,
Please do.
All right, so because I've heard some dismay about that. Well, yes, it's expensive, but good lawyers are expensive, especially in Washington, D.C. And yes, it's expensive, but let's put this in this context. We're dealing with a sector of this industry that has been playing a game of political catch-up. And when I say political catch-up, I also mean playing the game in the courts. And so for the longest of time, this industry has spent how much on all of this type of endeavor? Nothing.
Right.
Nothing. And I would argue, and I put this purely in a historic context, is that especially if you like to read the book Velvet Glove, Iron Fist on the history of the anti-smoking movement, if this industry had started playing the political game before the boom, just before the boom, it'd be a very political dynamic today. That's neither here nor there. And as I'm fond of saying, we're not going to be the first industry, and we're not going to be the last to claw its way back from political Armageddon. It happens all the time. It just takes time, effort, and resources. So yes, it is unreal, expensive, and when you look at six-digit monthly invoices from law firms, you have that same cringe. But let's look at this in this context. This was the first ruling by Judge Maida from the first hearing that we had in D.C. Circuit Court. This was you think about $6 million in this industry in this context. What I don't know how you put a value on this, but in this opinion that Judge Maida wrote, he explicitly talked about how unfairly this industry has been treated by this federal agency. Just the fact that an objective federal judge told a federal agency in this document that this industry has been treated unfairly is invaluable. It's amazing. And it sends a message not only through the courts to the agency. This is useful in telling our story to this administration, that an objective federal judge that, ironically enough, was appointed by President Obama to the bench, told a federal agency that we've been treated unfairly. He said we should be treated differently. Not a politician, not an industry leader. A federal judge said that. Flash forward. Thanks to our friends that we have, but thanks to the group in Texas, the Texas retailers, and in Fuego and El Cabano Cigar Company, their case that they filed in Texas that came back to Washington put that stay on those warning labels. This opinion right here. And then the Court of Appeal sent yet another message in the last month to the agency that they violated the Administrative Procedures Act. And yes, this applied to all cigars. 3 major opinions, a collection of federal judges helped reiterate the message that we've been trying to convey politically. So it brought another branch of government into helping to tell our message for us to an agency and an administration that we can we need all the reinforcement we can get, and the courts have helped to do that. I don't know how you put a value on that. I don't know how you say yes, $6 million, and we're not through yet. We're back in court next week on substantial equivalence. And tell me that's not important. And this is an industry responsibility. This is not the responsibility of a small coalition of companies. This is for the entire industry. And we need for the entire industry, meaning every manufacturer, large and small, to be a part of this process to help with that $6 million tab. Because guess what? It can get worse. If an administration, and I don't say this in a partisan context, so let's just we don't know which way the political winds are blowing, right. But I've learned through the last decade, it can always get worse. And it's ridiculous to think that an industry that's this size can't come up with $10 million for a legal fund, a few $1 million for a political fund to defend itself, to defend nearly $1 billion enterprise. Now that's where we need to get on the same hymn sheet. And that is where there needs to be some serious soul searching about how politics and litigation and the defense of this industry is paid for into the future. And that's an issue that's going to be on the table for the CRA board, the PCA board, every industry participant and leader that we've got. Everybody's going to have a serious discussion about that. Because once again, this is the proverbial wake-up call. But you can't tell me that for the approximate cost of between political and legal around $10 million over the course of the last decade to play a game of political catch-up isn't worth it. You can't convince me that money wasn't well spent to position us with Congress, with 2 presidents, and the courts to defend this industry.
Agreed. That being said, if I can add, I don't know if you had a chance to tune in when we were just promoting tonight's show later in the afternoon, and it was kind of like the gloves really came off, because anybody just watching this one episode should get an idea of what the CRA has done, what the PCA has done, what we're all trying to do now. And yet, with the industry where it is, and the fact that that gauntlet's going to come down in September, and we're not going to name names. We all promised each other earlier on we're not going to name any names. But the goal that there are those who will actually go out of their way to discredit what the CRA is doing or what the other organizations are doing. They choose to, I guess, how can I put this, bury their head in the sand. Maybe they don't want to accept the reality of it. Maybe they have another agenda. I don't know if they expect that this is going to blow over, or when push comes to shove, somebody is just going to miraculously take them by the hand and lead them to the promised land while they sit on the sidelines where they're not involved, whether it be with their voice or financially or any way possible. And it just irks me. And I'm sorry, I finally had to get that out because it's just mind-boggling that there are still those who choose to take this route.
Breathe
Well, I've
in,
heard,
breathe
I've
out.
listened to one, and I've listened to some recently, and I've heard them say, question the political success. Well, this is what I really too want to clarify here tonight. There's a lot more to lobbying than getting a bill through the Congress.
Yes.
It's called advocacy.
Right.
Because of the coalition that has been built over the course of the last 3 sessions of Congress, we now have a core group that we know we can go to echo our voice, to be a more powerful voice on behalf of this industry. And that's the service of the legislation. But it's also, we've had people that have come to our defense that are not on that legislation. And I know people don't want to hear this, but to have Donna Shalala as not only a member of Congress, and Gabby, you were with me when we toured El Teton de Bronze.
Yes, sir.
Shalala.
It was fantastic.
She is not on our bill. She won't sign on to our legislation, I don't think. She's not on the bill. But get this. The week after that tour of Sandy Kobas's factory in Little Havana in Miami, her letters to her own constituents changed, and they said premium handmade cigars are not a problem with youth access. They're not an issue with chemical addiction and mortality and adverse public health consequences. She said that publicly. She said it in committee. She has said it in Congress. She has said it publicly and privately. And you know what? It's not the fact that she's in Congress. It's the fact that she was a former Secretary of Health saying that.
All right.
And that puts it in a broader context. But really, just to take the high plane to a part of the advocacy effort is getting these members to echo our voice, to be a more powerful voice on our behalf. And the most recent examples of that are these 2 letters. And we put out the release on these 2 letters. One is signed by a coalition from the Florida congressional delegation, and one is signed by a coalition of members from the Pennsylvania delegation. Florida and Pennsylvania are the economic axis of this industry. And each member that signed these 2 letters, this coalition of 21 members of the House from 2 critical states, and rumor has it, Florida and Pennsylvania are going to be important in November. It's strictly a rumor. I've heard
really?
it.
Those 2 states?
It's on the internet. I heard they're important.
Yeah.
They only have a couple electoral votes. I wouldn't see why they're so important.
These members, each one that signed these 2 letters, 21 members of the House, each one of these are unique in this fashion too. They all have a line of communication to this administration. They are all supportive of the president. It's no political accident who signed these letters. They did so freely. They did so in defense of this industry. They recognize the economic consequences for their respective state if we are to be regulated in the fashion that's been proposed. And they help tell our story in these 2 letters, which are available publicly, and they're addressed to President Trump personally, and they were hand-delivered to the president's chief of staff. And the chief of staff, by the way, was a former co-sponsor of ours. The last 2 chiefs of staff were co-sponsors of ours. To help at this 11th hour moment tell this administration. That's advocacy too. That's lobbying too. And that too has value. Now, I'll let you talk.
There's 2 things, right? I think there's a certain level of misinformation in our industry, and it doesn't matter how big or small your company is, how much you sell, and there's certain people in the industry, and I respect everybody's opinion, but get informed first. When I've been there many times when Glynn literally picks up the phone, calls me up, he says, "Hey, I need you here on this day," and I don't care what's going on. I stop everything and I go. And I've been a witness to things happening, and a lot of things that happen aren't for public eyes or for public. It's like, you know, when you go to bed at night, the mice come out and they're all working, busy, accomplishing what they're doing, and that's what CRA's been doing. It's not a you guys don't publicize everything that you do, but if you stay in touch and you keep your finger on the pulse of everything that's happening, you'll be confident that we're doing the best we can. The best. I have zero doubts that CRA PCA is putting up the best fight they possibly can to get the best results for the entire industry.
Well, I appreciate that. And let me get this out too. And along those lines, if we had not taken the path that we did with the courts and with this fight, and I'm not. I hate to pick on my dear friends at La Aurora, but they saw this coming and they bought some advertising when they thought the warning label package was coming down to be implemented. And this was the only one I ever found. So I'm not picking on anybody, but this was the one that truly depicts what cigar advertising would have gone to if the FDA had gotten its way. Can everybody see that? That's an ad in a magazine.
Wow.
And there's your warning label.
Yeah.
Cigars are not a safe alternative to cigarettes. So that's what the FDA wants us to say. And in the words of our litigation counsel, marketing and advertising of premium handmade cigars would have become, quote, a billboard for government speech.
Yes.
And that's what, now imagine this, you know, I got my new Cigar Aficionado today, which has Sean Connery on the cover. I'm really happy about that. But anyway, can you imagine an eloquent magazine, any of the magazines
terrible.
that serve this, looking like that? Now, let me take it a step further. I've got some living examples of this. I think Oscar has some really creative packaging. Everybody, I've seen Oscar.
Sure.
Yes.
That's art. That's not selling to kids. That's art. Now, you take that same ad, and that's what that becomes.
Beautiful. Lovely.
Awesome.
Wait a minute, since we're
Most things don't respond well to warning labels.
out of his way to make this box for his anniversary, that's what that would have become.
Not just on the outside, but I'm sure on the inside as well. It would be
20%
destroyed.
on the inside, 30% on the outside.
Yeah.
And since Carlito's watching,
Oh, wow. Total destruction of an entire industry.
that's what it would have become. That's living
Travesty.
sample breathing of what it would have become if we had not taken the path that we did.
Well, I'm
amazing.
grateful that you guys took the
Billboard
path.
government speech. That's what we're fighting right there because, one, it's based upon questionable science. Two, they have no study to back it up. Three, we're just guinea pigs for what they want to do to the cigarette industry. And all of that got through, and I'm hopefully just teeing up a bunch of other questions. The political effort, and it was the political effort that worked with key members of the United States Senate, and specifically Senators Rubio, former Senator Nelson, Senator Manchin, during Scott Gottlieb's confirmation process as commissioner, to get him to say, listen, you lumped in cigars with e-cigarettes and vape and all this other garbage, and it's simply not fair, and you need to revisit this purely on the question of what are premium handmade cigars. The result of that was this.
Wow.
Same thickness as the court case. But this is the filing that was made on July 25th, 2018 that we have yet to get a response to, that addresses every piece of public health impact on mortality, inhalation, addiction, the key questions of demographics on how we don't apply, that
Right.
we're a part of a 30 to 60-year-old demographic. First cigar at 27, first cigarette at 16, evaluating millions of transactions to demonstrate the buying patterns and patterns of usage of premium handmade cigar consumers. All of that was engulfed in this study here, which was only about $250,000, by the way. But it was a political effort that worked with Gottlieb, that worked with the senators to get this. And this study, and the very fact that Gottlieb held a press conference to announce that he was going to do this, and to say we're going to evaluate new information for premium handmade cigars, and ironically at the same time the New England Journal of Medicine, the American Medical Association, the Centers for Disease Control past study, all came out with stats that broke our way to make our case from objective sources, unquestionably objective sources, and all that was encompassed in this study. And if it weren't for the political effort, it would not have been cited as a reason for Judge made his decision, because what happened then? Judge looked at the FDA lawyers and said, now, let me get this right. You want me to compel them to comply with all these regulations, and you're thinking about changing the rules?
Wow.
And this process allowed that to happen. And that's where the court litigation piece of the puzzle connects to the political piece of the puzzle that connects to the bureaucratic piece of the puzzle. Is this exciting?
Well, I'll tell you what, Glynn Loope, you are the man to really voice everything that has happened and everything.
Hopefully I'm just teeing up a bunch of questions.
Definitely,
No.
Glenn. And here, you know what you are teeing up, Glenn? You are teeing up our 30-second bumper for the CRA.
All right, let me get this one piece up.
Go ahead, sir.
This piece of the puzzle was the economic impact analysis that should have been done before the regulations ever took place. And this study from a former FDA economist cited what? That the cost of complying with the regulations equals 100% of the profit margin for every cigar company.
Oof,
wow.
Basically putting everybody out of business.
And this will put thousands of Americans out of work, from the farms in Connecticut to the entire retail channel, to the supply and logistics and shipping channels, the distribution network, the logistics piece of the puzzle, down to the retailer in Iowa, that thousands of jobs would be lost in this country if you get on this path. And that study substantiated that. And that doesn't count the fact that we rounded up a coalition of embassies to echo what the job impact would be on Honduras, Nicaragua, and the Dominican Republic.
Wow.
And we've played the card of what it means to international trade. We have talked about the impact on immigration.
Absolutely.
We have talked about the significant role that this industry has as a trading commodity between three countries in a very politically and economically sensitive part of this hemisphere. There have been briefings for the State Department, the National Security Council, letters and narrative to the Secretary of State, all echoing this message, and that is just as much a part of the political process as getting a bill through Congress. And I'll shut up with that.
No. If anybody had a question on what's been going on, and if anybody questions if any activities been taking place, I think you just got your answer. So we're going to be right back in about 30 seconds with Glynn Loope with CRA, right after this little message from the CRA. See you.
Fellow premium cigar smokers, please take the time to visit, support, and join Cigar Rights of America. They can be found at www.cigarrights.org. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very. All right.
Whatever you got to do.
All right. We are back with Glynn Loope, Gabby, and Armin. And Gabby hopped off for a few seconds, and which then really just screws up our whole little squares here. But that's okay. That's okay. We'll put Glenn right back over here. So Glenn, thank you very much for going through that. Very impressive, and you're absolutely right. There is more to just bills when it comes to lobbyists. There's a lot of work that's done behind the scenes that I don't think a lot of people realize. I mean, I remember talking to Gabby when he traveled up to there he is. When he traveled up to thanks, there you go. When he traveled up to DC. And it not only is it a lot of the work that you're doing that not realized, but it's amazing just how much is not known about the cigar industry and how much it is all lumped together with other tobacco products.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And you know, these are the people that are drafting bills and making arguments on regulating an industry they don't even know about. So there is a great deal of education, a lot of work that you all are doing behind the scenes in order to kind of bring everybody up to speed on the differentiating factors between the cigar industry and other tobacco products.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, I've been in briefings in offices of senators that are vehemently anti-tobacco, where literally certain given offices would not recognize, chose not to recognize the difference between a bag of chewing tobacco, a can of smokeless, a carton of cigarettes, and a $450 box of cigars. Clearly, absolutely, in terms of their attitude, their political approach, they tune us out. And that's a part of the political equation that has to be recognized. There's some violently anti-tobacco legislation that's gotten through the House, even though it recognized the difference with premium cigars, and we don't like the definition that it included a very high price point to define premium, but still put a liberal House on record for exemption. Well, the Senate version of that bill is worse and is not open to amendment. And again, I don't say this in a partisan context. I put it purely as a piece of political reality, that if the Congress takes a hard turn to the left with the executive branch, we don't know what's going to happen with that. I mean, that legislation would ban any form of mail order transaction, and would expedite all of the pieces of the regulatory process. It would be a horrible, horrible crystal ball into what could be a political future if two branches of government take a hard turn to the left. And that's where building alliances with people that you wouldn't think about being friends or allies or potential friends and allies are critical. And it gets into the significance, and I hope we dwell on this quite a bit, is the significance of grassroots outreach.
Yeah.
And the significance of political engagement by every manufacturer and every consumer and every retailer in America, because we don't know what's going to happen on November the 3rd. You want me to chat about that for just a second?
Definitely, Glenn. But I did want to read something here. I think you may want to comment on it. I know Gabby will probably weigh in, and Carlito also had a very nice comment. But Ishmael says, Glenn, sorry to say, but you spent time, money, and effort printing those documents for literally nothing. For sure, I can talk like you, but I have an accent. Blah blah blah. Cigar industry is easy. Proof that you were here on a day. The ask and the proof that your cigars are made similar as the ones on the dates they asked you. Otherwise, it is like every other business. In other words, don't tell me about it. Just show me. Easy enough. But yes, it is hard to be in this business, but not just because of the FDA.
Well, let me take a response to that.
Go ahead, Gabby, because then I'll read Carlito's, because Carlito's very gracious with his comments. But go ahead, yes. Doc.
Well, I think that there are different. Let me first say that English was my third language, right? And I had to adapt quickly to assimilate to this beautiful country that I now live in. And in every country, the political components, they operate differently. And I think the most complicated country I've ever lived in as far as getting things achieved on a political scale is this country. Things take a long time. Things take decades, okay? And each and every action that has occurred over the past... Glynn Loope's been in the cigar industry for 12 years now. To say that he wasted his... I'm not even going to quote it to exact words, but to say that money was wasted printing those pages, I think does a huge disservice to our entire industry, to our family of premium cigar manufacturers. I understand that, having come from, the background that I did, having the education that I am very humbled and grateful to have had, And coming into the premium cigar industry, I wanted to go into an easy industry that I could just, make cigars, live my passion, and kind of make people happy. But I quickly found out that that's not really what this industry is about. This industry is about fighting for the very rights of each and every person to own and operate a business that has existed in this country for the past 200 plus years at a minimum. And you cannot take that attitude moving forward. Now, there are a lot of people out there who are sitting on grandfathered products, and their biggest dream, because they have trouble competing in the marketplace, is to see 50, 60, 70% of the industry wiped up, because it is their belief that they're going to gain market share immediately. Let me tell you, if you haven't been able to sell your cigars 10 years ago or 5 years ago at the level that you want, you're not going to be able to sell them at the level that you desire moving forward if 50% of the industry disappears. If half of the industry disappears, here's the misconception that people have. People think that just because they're sitting on a grandfathered product that they're okay. Bullshit.
Nope.
The way federal regulations are right now is that they're getting the green light to pass right now, but that doesn't mean that in the future the FDA wants to get their claws on every single product. They're going to want to test every single product, grandfathered or not. There's no exemption for anybody. And not just that, but the reality is, if you look at the food industry, the FDA is currently regulating food processing plants outside the United States. So what's to prevent the FDA from going down and regulating each and every factory that we have? I mean, if you take a look at a lot of these factories, my God, you walk in and the floors are made of dirt. Do you think the FDA is going to approve a product being made at a factory where the floors are made of dirt? There's no hand washing stations. There's no hygiene protocols. People are literally eating at the same table where they're rolling cigars. There's no way to comprehend a statement like that. So I think it's an insult for someone to say something like that about all the efforts that have been put into place. So, the 5 trips I've taken, the countless hours I've spent, and I'm just a fart compared to what Glynn, Loope, and PCA has done the past 10, 12, 15 years. But I don't understand where the logic comes into that. You know what? If I were whoever said those comments, I'd be on my knees right now thanking you and everybody else at CRA for fighting for somebody that you've never even met.
It's like you said before, it comes down to education, and it's just not, the word education is it's listening and fully understanding the hard work and what's being done and understanding the American political system. And the one thing you said, Gabby, which is very true, and we talked before about this, the government's like water. Yes, the statement was made that this is like every other industry. You're right. When there's regulations, the government's like water. It finds a way in, and once it gets in, it goes all over. So there is no safe bet, there is no safe place or safe zone with grandfather brands and so on and so forth. In my experience in the political arena, as soon as that door's ajar, that breeze can keep coming in. So hats off to you, Glynn, and all the hard work you've been doing. And I'm in the same boat with Gabby that to say that it was a waste of time. I mean, you just laid out, seriously, if you sat back objectively and listened to everything that you said and the documents that you've shown and the studies and all the information that's been presented, to say that it was for nothing, then you're purposely turning a blind eye to it.
Well, I've said for some time, if there's any good to have come from this process, is that it has forced the industry to study itself. Every other major industrial sector studies itself. Everybody would know that the banking industry and manufacturing and the energy sector and you name it, transportation, any major special interest group studies itself so that they are properly armed with the right information to defend itself in the halls of Congress, with the bureaucracy, with an administration, no matter who they may be. For the first time in history, and it's taken, the last 8 to 10 years to amass even a more than of what I've shown tonight. But now this industry has the research to properly defend itself, to logically defend itself, with objective studies and analysis, with objective legal analysis, with proper background on all these critical questions, because we have to know how to combat those forces of evil that are against us. You know, when the body parts lobby comes after us, they do everything humanly possible to, and if you read the final rule, this is, I'm not being dramatic by saying this, when you read the final rule the FDA put out, they did everything humanly possible to equate a cigar with a pack of cigarettes. Right. And I'm not saying that's just the way it is. They did. We now have the research and the ammunition to logically and objectively, with an amazing level of objectivity, to defend ourselves in every single corridor of our government and at all levels of government. I mean, we've used this research on public health impact to fight smoking bans at the local and state level. Now think about that. Talk about bang for your buck. Talk about bang for your buck. These studies on demographic usage, patterns of usage, inhalation addiction, and mortality have in fact been used in city halls and state capitals to fight smoking bans and to get exemptions for cigar bars and cigar lounges for cigar consumers. That's a trickle-down effect that I don't know if you can put a value on.
No, it's
exactly.
You can't. It's
and we
huge.
Spoke about it before, and you even gave the viewers a visual, warning labels, whether it was combating warning labels, whether it was finally giving the FDA a proper definition of what actually is a premium cigar. The fight now that we have of having premium cigars exempt, not having to go through standard equivalency. So again, I just don't understand where somebody can literally turn around and say that somehow it's in vain or it's not doing the job that it is supposed to. So I don't know how much of it is just not comprehending or just purposely not wanting to understand.
I think, you know, a lot of people are talking about substantial equivalence, and we brought up some good points in our meeting with Mitch Zeller, which I got to tell you was probably the pinnacle of everything that's happened to date, to get the head of the horse of the Center for Tobacco Products to literally listen in on a presentation given by key members of our industry, gentlemen like George Padron, Carlito Fuente, Drew Newman. I had the honor of being there and speaking. And when we look at the premium cigar industry, it's an industry comprised today of 51,000 SKUs represented by all the premium cigar companies making products, right? The cigarette industry is completely the opposite of how we would see. They don't create a new cigarette every 3 months. They don't have a new crop that they have to frickin' manipulate and figure out how to produce a new blend out of that product. They're machine-made products. A company like Marlboro might have 10 products in the market, but guess what? When they spend money on doing substantial equivalence testing on that one product, they expect to make billions on that product. We're the exact opposite. We have 51,000 products that we have to get through this needle eye of what the FDA is demanding of our industry. And let me tell you, the cost of compliance, like Glenn said, does not equal any surmountable amount of profits. All the profits would get sucked up. Literally, it would be like we would not even cease. We would cease to exist as an industry, especially the smaller producers, and even the larger family-owned operations. Rocky Patel, you got the Newmans, you got the Fuente family. They would see a 50% of their products get destroyed and disappear. The thought of even introducing a new product to market, having to go through the pre-market approval pathway, you're talking 2 to 3 years minimum. You know, I can't even place it's funny, I got so many people texting right now. They love the show, you guys. This shit is on fire, I gotta say.
Maybe the government's just misinformed because they're just used to running an operation at a loss all the time and seems to get by. They think everybody else can.
I think that might be it.
They got a lot of free legal advice.
I have a question for Glynn Loope. Glynn Loope, let's take the cigarette industry, for example. The past 10 years, how many products have they gotten approved through the pre-market approval pathway? Hasn't it been one?
Yeah, and it's probably still the case today, but um, you talked about the 51,000 SKUs. Not too long ago, the FDA was 4,500 applications behind on processing cigarettes and smokeless applications.
Wow.
Wow.
Fantastic.
So it's not a pathway that currently exists, nor is it navigable by our industry. And what all these associations are trying to do, and everything they've been fighting for, is to make this. And I love Armin. I think you're such an optimist, and so am I. When we think of the term exemption, that's no longer a reality for me. I just want a navigable path. That's what I
Yeah.
want. Tell me what we need to do. Tell me that it's within our limits, and we'll do everything in our power. Don't bankrupt us, but give us a navigable pathway. And that's what CRA is doing right now. That's what all these organizations are doing. They're coming together to try to create a navigable pathway, something realistic for our industry. We're such a tiny industry. What is it? 0.048?
And
Yeah.
frankly, I want to make sure this point gets across. Everything we're doing on the political front and the legal front benefit every single company, no matter how small or how large they are. This notion that somehow, some way, we're voicing positions that are advantageous to mid-sized manufacturers or the members of the board, or
Yes.
that's hogwash. I mean, everything that's been accomplished on the legal front and the messaging on the political front works to everybody's advantage. And no one could prove otherwise on that. It's absolutely ridiculous to think. And, I don't know how else to put it.
No, you're right. I mean, you spent time with me. We were drafting letters to the representatives here in South Carolina.
Your Senator Scott, who needs to get the message loud and clear that
Yeah.
your company is the one that's going to be harmed as a company that's incorporated in the state of South Carolina. You stand to lose, and Senator Scott needs to get that message loud and clear, and we work together on that messaging to your congressman and to Senator Scott.
It was greatly appreciated.
Which kind of brings me to a piece of the puzzle that I want to make sure we get out and put on the table, is that this election is critical. And, it's not a partisan issue, as I've said thousands of times. But I point this out for a couple of different reasons. One, I want to remind people that Dr. Scott Gottlieb, as commissioner, before he was commissioner in 2012, wrote this piece called BAM's Cigar Trouble. And at the time, Dr. Gottlieb was on the staff of the American Enterprise Institute. He was a former FDA bureaucrat in I believe, the Bush administration. But he was just at a think tank when he wrote this in 2012. And he absolutely equated cigar regulation to Barack Obama's ability to carry Florida. Think about that.
Wow.
The future commissioner of the FDA wrote a piece, and he called it Stogiegate.
Really?
And to me, what this highlights is that somebody as smart as Dr. Gottlieb, who's on the news every single day now because of the pandemic, he recognized the political consequences of not helping this industry in a raw political context. He called it the president's Florida problem.
Yep.
He recognized it. Now, to dovetail with that, during the last election cycle, millions upon millions of dollars were spent on polling by both candidates, Secretary Clinton and Donald Trump. And Cigar Aficionado ran a poll. Now, I was sitting there holding Larry Sabato's political prediction map on election night 2016 until 4:15 in the morning. And, nobody thought that Donald Trump was going to win. I'm not sure Donald Trump thought Donald Trump was going to win. But one poll called it. And again, this is not in a partisan context, but one poll called it. The Cigar Aficionado readership poll.
That's right.
The Cigar Aficionado readership poll called the election when millions of other dollars of polling from some very sophisticated, scientifically run polling entities said there was no way that was going to happen. I highlight that for this reason. Elections matter, and it proves that cigar smokers are a political constituency and that it's important to be a part of the political process. I had a guy come up to me at the Big Smoke in Vegas last November, and he said, a guy comes up to me and he said, can we have a cigar over here for just a minute? I said, sure, absolutely. And he said, listen, I'm not like a lot of these other people. And I said, what do you mean? He says, I'm a liberal Democrat. and he says, and I'm from Delaware, and I see Joe Biden. And I said, well, okay, but I love cigars, and I want to make sure they get the message about what cigars mean to me as a voter from Delaware, who's a liberal Democrat. And I said,
wow.
And I said, boy, I get it, and thank you for wanting to help message to. And this was last November, and the moral of the story is we're going to need everybody. When you don't know which way the political chips are going to fall, you need everybody. And depending on what happens in November, even more people are going to have to be involved in this process.
Right.
You know, we've had members of Congress who never would have signed on to our legislation to exempt, but who politically were against us, who personally and philosophically would be against us. A single cigar shop in a district got them to change their mind.
Wow.
Because there's one thing that all these people want in Congress: to get reelected. And let's just say, for the sake of discussion, let's just say for the sake of argument, there's a hard turn to the left on November the 3rd. We're going to need even more level of engagement. You know, this reminds me of a quick story I want to tell. Right after I took this job, I mean, within weeks of accepting this job, I went up and met with some dear friends of mine in the NRA, and I said, you know, you've got a lot of really cool political strategies that I think we could learn from. And they had just lost from the NRA perspective, they had just lost the White House, they had just lost the House, they had just lost the Senate. And I said, how do you handle a political environment and this was 2009. January of 2009. I said, how do you handle this political environment when you guys at the NRA have just been politically shut out? And he pulled out a sign and put it on the desk there at the Capitol Hill office, and it just said, don't mess with me. Don't mess with me. They got galvanized by losing. So while we, hope for a better regulatory outcome through the next several weeks and months, we don't know where the election's going to go. We know that the regulatory process isn't going to go away one way or another. It doesn't go away, even if we get some positive benefit through the next several weeks and months. This is going to be an ongoing fight, and we're going to need every shop and every consumer in America to be even more politically engaged if another hand of cards are dealt to this industry as a result of what happens on November the 3rd. We have to plan for every single contingency. And I put that out there because this dialogue is a long way from being over, even if we get good outcome from the courts or the administration.
Yes.
Agreed.
So, Glynn, it's July 17th, Friday. We should be having a drink and a cigar, but I'm just having a cigar tonight, right? Because I didn't want the drinking to bring out...
I'm drinking water.
Yeah, well, good for you. Me too. Carlito Fuente, man, he's been awesome tonight. He's been commenting. I don't know if you guys can take a moment to read some of his comments.
Yeah.
Carrie.
Wonderful.
Please read his most recent one. What does it say?
Yeah,
I don't care what side of the fence you're on. If you're a political official or someone of influence or voice for justice and freedom, think of these words. Premium cigar enthusiasts vote.
Yeah.
Very well stated.
It's very
That's
true.
it right there.
So we have a court date coming up. You guys do. We all do. July 22nd. I think you guys are going to tackle the question of substantial equivalence. I don't know if you heard Half Wheel during our podcast recording. announced that Honduras this Wednesday is shutting down all cigar factories for 2 weeks. You know, the pandemic has affected us greatly. You know, we don't want this virus to be the excuse why we get regulatory easing, but we can't deny the fact that businesses all over the world are suffering right now. Yeah. And Central America, Honduras, and a lot of people don't really talk about what's going on in their respective cigar producing countries, but I have family there. I'm very concerned. The country right now has every hospital bed filled with COVID patients. There is a shortage of oxygen. They've actually run out of oxygen in the country of Honduras. It's a disaster. And their solution is shutting down different towns and different municipalities to avoid people from traveling from one area to another. I mean, we're in the middle of the worst, besides the last pandemic 100 years ago. I don't even know how to put things into perspective. So July 22nd, you guys are going to court, and you do have arguments to present, but from now until September, when the substantial equivalent guidelines go into effect, what can we expect will be happening behind the scenes? What is it that you guys are trying to achieve for the premium cigar industry and all these family producing operations? What can we expect moving forward? You've done such a great job telling us how we got to where we are today, and the countless hours and the countless funds. And you're right. You know, if the industry's only spent $6, $7, $8, $10 million the past few years, when you put things into perspective that we've been like the Wild West for the past 100 years, those are pennies. Yeah. We need to come together as an industry and speak with our money and get behind you guys and get behind this fight, because we're running out of time. And yes, there's no end date to this. Regulations are regulations, and you always fight them. But what can we expect the next month, the next 2 months? I know you don't have a magic crystal ball, but what are you trying to achieve?
Well, the position paper is that substantial equivalence simply doesn't apply to us. There are too many variables for it to apply to us. You're dealing with an agricultural product where the, only ingredients are tobacco, water, and thyme. And, how cigars simply change with time. And they change with how long that tobacco has been exposed to sun. All natural. And anytime you do a product that's made by hand, there are going to be additional variables in that. The fact that it's an agricultural product brings up even a piece of the final rule where they recognize that there are agricultural variances that would cause the product to change. You know as well as I do, you put a box of cigars on the shelf and you let it sit there for 5 years because you just think that's what it needs. It's going to naturally change. And it revolves around the agency's obsession with nicotine. And we, since my visual aids I got another one. This is what we filed on the role of nicotine and cigars.
Fantastic.
And how it's, biologically impossible to absorb the level of nicotine into your bloodstream that's in a cigar. Right. I mean, I've said this time and again to any bureaucrat that would listen. If you want to prove that cigars are not addictive, go to a trade show, because I'll have one in my mouth from 8 in the morning until 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
And I'll do that for 6 days in a row, and I'll get home and I may not want one for a day or two.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But there's a lot of things that go into that, and everyone here knows the papers I've written about premium cigars being a poor delivery method for nicotine. We've gone into discussions about ammonia. Like, we're the only tobacco industry that actually spends years removing ammonia from the tobacco, but to stay on course with what's coming, I do have. Yeah, go ahead. But I have one question.
Go ahead.
My question is this, right? The FDA has not proven yet that substantial equivalence testing works. So how can a federal agency who has not yet gone through the process and established the process of testing premium cigars enforce and leave us, an industry with limited resources, the burden of, this is like guilty until proven innocent. Why should we have to spend? And I know what we're going to find out. We're going to find out that substantial equivalence testing doesn't work for premium cigars.
And they've been told that by voices a lot bigger than us. I was in a presentation at the, I think it was like 2 years ago, the Tobacco Merchants Association did in Northern Virginia. And there were FDA staff in the room. And I hope I get his title right, but it's close to being right. The director of research for Scandinavian tobacco presented and said there is no way to test premium handmade cigars. Outright said it. There is no way to test premium handmade cigars with any confidence or consistency whatsoever. Let's go back to the premise of your question. You've got that variable. There is no logical, consistent way to test cigars. Two, there's been no guidance issued by the agency telling us what to do as to what they expect.
And just so everybody knows who's listening into the podcast, that's just not Glynn Loope's opinion. I've spoken to our law firm that represents our company, and we've discussed substantial equivalence testing, and their comments to me directly just last week were that the FDA has zero guidance on testing for premium cigars, yet they want to enforce it in less than 2 months from today.
And why should a company that was just created, let's just say this year, let's say a cigar company was created in the last 24 months. We know that new companies have been, a ton of new companies have been incorporated in this industry since the final rule came out in 2016. Tons of companies. Why should their product be penalized because they didn't exist before 2016 or before 2007?
That's
when it's
exactly
still
right.
the natural agricultural product that it is. It's ridiculous to think that these arbitrary timelines ought to apply to this product that's being made as the same, as you put it in when we first began this discussion, being made in the same way as it was hundreds of years ago. It's very true. It's so anti-small business, and that's one of the reasons the Small Business Administration has been so supportive, is we have taken companies like those represented by the Boutique Association into there, and Gabby, you went with us to the Secretary of Health's office, you went with Congressman Posey's office, you went with us to the SBA to get the point across that your companies didn't even exist when the final rule was coming out.
That's right.
Or much less 2007.
Right.
So anyway, the council is going to be arguing all of these points next Wednesday in beautiful downtown Washington. And I'd be glad to provide a report back to you, because you don't need me back on the show, but to report back the outcome of what was said and exchanged, and then we'll sit back and wait for another judicial. Mm-hmm. Now, we also can't rule out another extension because of the pandemic.
Yes.
It's ridiculous. It's pathetic that we had to go to court in the first place to get this extension. Absolutely ridiculous when the commissioner of the FDA and the Secretary of Health had the power to, because of a national emergency, to grant that, but no, they had to have a judge compel them to do it, which is absolutely it's horrible the way it's been treated by the agency in that regard. Let's hope we don't go through that piece again, and that this is put to bed well before the September 9, September 12 deadline.
There's one more thing that I also wanted to add, because Glenn, the three of us talk about this daily, if not multiple times a day. And knowing Gabby the way we all do, he'll leave no stone unturned, and he had uncovered some pretty fascinating data, one of which is the following, that companies that have products that go through fermentation, right? Did we discuss this?
Yes, correct.
Don't go through this type of testing. And some examples were what? Wine, cheese. Now, last time I checked, that we put our cigars through the same type of process. So why all of a sudden is that not spoken of?
I think what Armin's trying to say is that the FDA does not regulate any products that undergoes an extensive fermentation process, because it's an all-natural process in the wine industry, in the liquor industry, in the cheese industry, in several industries. And just like in tobacco, the fermentation process is so dependent on multiple factors, right? The natural flora of bacteria and fungus that exist on the surface of the tobacco leaf, depending on the crop, where it was grown, the nutrients of the soil, the water content. So fermentation is not a laboratory reaction that is reproduced. It's a natural reaction that occurs over time. It's exothermic. It produces heat. And it's really done in such a way where the masters, the people that literally process the tobacco naturally in order to guide the fermentation process, there is no set testing method that tells them when the tobacco is ready. This is all based on subjective data, which is flavor, taste, aroma, all these things. So how can we be subject to testing when the FDA has literally themselves said that they don't require testing on any products that go through an extended fermentation process? So these are all things that need to come up. And, Armin, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, good point, Armin.
There's so many obvious points to us why we shouldn't be regulated, but it's the educational process that takes time and it takes money and it's a pain in the ass. And everybody in the premium cigar industry needs to understand that there are soldiers in this industry that are putting up the good fight. Glynn Loope, in my eyes, being the primary one from my experience the past few years, and which leads me to the next question, which you don't want to hear this question. I do not accept Glenn's gonna hang. If you could kick me on the nuts, Glenn, I think you would. I do not accept the idea of you leaving and stepping down from Cigar Rights of America. That's just my personal opinion.
No, it's not just yours. It's all of us, and that's like the championship bulls going for their next title, and Phil Jackson just says, "I'm out of here."
But how about that fermentation? How about that?
Nice deflect.
I'm just telling you how I feel.
Elections matter.
I know. No. We have to be sincere,
Yeah, we share that thought. I reiterate.
I think what's beautiful about our industry is it's comprised of people that are genuinely in love with this industry and the people in the industry. And I have great love for Carlito, even though I don't see him often. I mean, once a year, if that. But we share a lot of sentiment with what we're doing, and it's a lot of sacrifice. And at the end of the day, all of us that either own a factory or brands or are in the industry, we are all employees and servants to people that are working at the factories, because we not only create jobs, we provide stability to them. And on the other end of the spectrum, when you look at the connoisseurs, we ultimately work for them. We're making a product that they're going to enjoy. The reward that we get is the connection that we make and bringing people together. And you're one of those people that have brought so many people together. I would not be here today with Carrie and Armin had it not been for the passion that you instilled in me. That's why we created the Boutique Cigar Association. That's why we do what we do, because we see you as an amazing ally, as a great mentor, and as somebody that is an instrumental piece of the puzzle to the fight that we're fighting.
Well, I'm a cheerleader, and there's a lot of people a lot smarter that we can pull into a room that can articulate the intricacies of cigar making and aging and skill that goes into that process, and lawyers and consultants and researchers. What I enjoy doing is taking that information and selling it. And that's what lobbyists and advocates do, is that I like getting an economic impact study and then dramatizing what that study means to this industry, or getting a public health study and then articulating that we're not them.
Man, you're killing me, because you're giving me the exact reason why I do not accept you leaving.
Exactly.
Yeah, Glenn, you better stop by your head, bro. You're not.
Yeah, seriously.
I've always been lucky to advocate for things that I've truly believed in. When I had my own consulting firm between 2001 and late 2008, till the time I said yes to this, I always worked for causes and clients and the like that I believed in. And you've got to believe. And I would support any of them to this day because of what they meant to me personally. And in that regard, that's what cigars mean to me. I will always consider myself an advocate in one form or another for this industry. It's been just an amazing ride where every single day is different. It's talking about a smoking ban proposal in Fort Worth, Texas one day, trying to get a cigar bar statute in Chicago the next, a tax cap bill in one state or another the day after that, and then spend 3 days arguing with members of Congress or a bureaucracy. That's the beautiful part of this. And, you know, my father said to me a long time ago, son, if you want to be in public life, you better have a tough hide. And, you know, my grandfather was a former sheriff. My father was an elected official. Was kind of born and raised in fact, you know, in a manner of speaking, I don't know anything else. I've just been lucky to apply my passion for politics to things that I believe in. And that, in that respect, I hope that we have turned a lot of people into cigar advocates that would not have been before. That process is not going to change. This organization, in one form or another, will continue in terms of galvanizing consumers across America, organizing retailers across America, building coalitions within the manufacturing community. All of that is going to plow forward with or without me, because the industry now totally gets it that it has to be at the, you know, the proverbial table. I use the saying 1,000 times in Washington: if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And this industry now clearly knows that it is always needing to be at the table. And that's been the true success story of the last decade, always being at the table. The fact that, you know, CRE was the first, and then thankfully PCA moved its headquarters from Georgia to Washington, D.C. There's now a standing presence for this industry there. That's not going to change. Furloughs don't change that. That too shall pass. This is a moment in time. This is simply a moment in time, and this too shall pass. But the advocacy of this industry is not going to go away, and nothing has caused a blip or a state of confusion or abdication of responsibility because of these short hiccups that the industry has experienced. And frankly, nobody's missed a beat, and it won't miss a beat with or without me. Because thankfully the institution of cigar advocacy, I think, has been built into a sustainable model. If you blend what CRA has built on the consumer side with regard to its database of consumers, and, you know, we put out, you know, 100,000 emails a week that weren't put, this effort has grown. If I am proud of absolutely anything of the last decade, it's the fact that this organization has, and this effort has grown from a 5-city tour to a 50-state coalition. And I'm not being overly dramatic by saying that. It started with a 5-city tour, the Freedom Tour of 2008, with a handful of manufacturers, 5 cities to 50 in a decade. And that's an institution that's not going to change. And PCA has properly and rightfully built cigaraction.org into a standing outreach method that retailers can use to the consumer community. You know, we've now got the institutions necessary to be successful advocates for this industry. It took a while. It took some money. It took a lot of shoe leather politics. It took a lot of yelling and screaming in board meetings and hundreds upon hundreds of conference calls and the like, but it's done. And that's not going to change. And thank goodness, the true believers of this industry, of both of these organizations, are firmly entrenched and firmly at the table to make it a success well into the future. And I feel that with all my heart and soul.
Well, I'll tell you, Glenn, beautifully said. And but I still do agree with Gabby. And I do, because you know what? I do represent that the cigar company that's opened up within the last 24 months. And I didn't start a cigar company, the main reason why is the passion, and you have to have the passion to take that leap. You have to have a passion to do what you do when it comes to lobbying and working for the industry and hitting every aspect of it. Been inspired by great people like Dr. Caffey. I've had great experiences and made great friendships with Felix Mesa, El Galan, Carlito Fuente, huge influence. And Carlito posted a comment which I think really reflects a lot of what we've been talking about, and I've said it a million times. And he said, "I would regretfully understand if the demise of our company would be because of the horrific virus. God help us. But to have our family companies unjustly destroyed by some political bureaucrats is something that will never be swallowed or forgiven. It's simply wrong and not in any way or anything close to the American of the land of the free and Lady Justice." And I've always said, I'm living in a country that is the greatest country in the world, and the right to pursue happiness and pursue a business, but right now it's being challenged and it's being threatened by political bureaucrats. So I just want to say, thank you for all your hard work. I know we've talked offline, and you've helped me a great deal with fighting the fight here in South Carolina. And I completely appreciate the passion that you put forth with this, because you can't do it without the passion.
Well, a lot of good. I keep going back to what's been built, and retailers are really starting to get it too. I told the guys in Virginia in 2006. I was helping the Cigar Association of Virginia get organized in 2006, and people like Gary Pesh and Old Virginia Tobacco and Shorty Abel at Havana Connections and Scott Regina at Emerson's, my local shop, Milan Tobacconist, which is over 100 years old, 10 miles here from my house. I said, you're no longer tobacconist. You have to have politics in your job description now. And it's sad that anything associated with tobacco, that it took until 2006 for that to happen. But these wake-up calls happened because of the political process. And we just went through a wonderful exercise. Josh Habersky with PCA and I just went through a wonderful exercise with the Georgia retailers on some very anti-cigar tax legislation that had been introduced in Georgia. The Georgia retailers have really come together into a well-established trade association representing the retailers of Georgia, and they were successful. And we had a great exchange of information between PCA and CRA and the Georgia retailers. We reinforced them with outreach to the consumer, to the legislature in Atlanta, and they were successful. And we're going through the same exact exercise now with the retailers in Michigan, trying to get a tax cap institutionalized in Michigan. Gabby and I were talking about this earlier today, about this legislation in California that is written so broadly. It's a flavor ban bill, but it's written so broadly that if a manufacturer uses flavored descriptors in their marketing in any way, shape, or form, if Gabby comes out with a cigar and it says notes of caramel, he's a flavored cigar.
Wow. That's
the next wave. So, California retailers and the like and their advocates have to be engaged on that. What the Oklahoma retailers did under the leadership of Todd Nafa and ZT Cigars in Oklahoma City, the worst statewide smoking ban bill in the country, introduced again this year, died again, but it's a threat. And the Oklahoma retailers, and we had Oklahoma consumers that are part of CRA, go to the Capitol and advocate against that piece of legislation, and it died again. PCA, CRA, Oklahoma retailers, PCA, CRA, Georgia retailers, CRA, PCA, Michigan retailers. Do you see a trend here? These are the types of institutions that are being built to reinforce the political positions of this industry that are going to help it decades to come.
Wow, I'll tell you what, guys, that was an amazing hour and 50 minutes of just so much information. There was in the past hour and 50 minutes, I think we're talking 10 years of information collimated into this one show as to where we're at and what we can expect and what has been done. And if anybody takes anything for granted, I think it's very simple. Just take the time to understand where we are, how we got here, and what we have to look forward to. And participation is something that is essential. Financially, if you can't participate financially, do it through effort or vice versa. But everyone's got to carry their own weight, because all of our companies are going to be equally affected by these regulations. All of us. Nobody's going to be spared. You know, and I'm not going to mention any of the big companies, but you take multi-billion-dollar companies, you know, the only thing that they're going to benefit from is a monopoly. A monopoly in a regulated field, which is no longer fun to do business in. I mean, I looked at the last, the president and the CEO of Imperial Brands out of the UK. I forgot the name of this woman, highly educated, their press release as to why they were unloading premium cigars was that it's not profitable. We're dumping the division because we have to answer to our shareholders. And she literally said, we're dumping premium cigars because they're not profitable and they're affecting our bottom line. This is the largest cigar company in the entire industry. So what does that do for our companies? You know, we're barely making a living doing what we do. We do it because we love it. And we have to continue to put up the good fight, because we need to continue to operate as each and every single company that was founded in the past 200 years does. Mm-hmm. You know, the Newmans have done an amazing job. I know they get criticized for their definition of premium cigar, but you know what? I think we're preserving a historic monument in the state of Florida. Their factory, their operations, the way they operate. Look at what Jeff Borshowitz is doing, growing tobacco, resuscitating the tobacco industry in Florida for premium cigars. Yeah. This is like destroying historic monuments. We can't do that. We can't allow this to happen. And I think that better days are coming. I think we just have to keep the pressure on. I've got a good friend of mine out of North Carolina, former senator. I won't mention his name just to keep him neutral, but he did say the secret to politics is keeping the pressure on. Mm-hmm. So when you get people that come from all over the gamut of the cigar industry and saying, what have you done? We're wasting our time. What a waste of money. Absolutely not. It's about keeping the pressure on. I can't see what Carlito's writing. If somebody could please read the comments, that would be fantastic.
He said, good, thank you. I'm a good reader. He said, good, Dr. Caffey. For Big Corp, it's about the money, power, and control.
Yeah, they can't.
I'll tell you what, along those lines, we had a meeting with the White House Domestic Policy Council during the Obama administration in that last 6 months after the rule had come out. And one of the staff members, long since gone, one of the staff members said after the meeting was over, and they recognized this, they said, we know that if we go down this path, not one less cigar is going to be smoked. You're just going to be smoking cigars made by 4 companies, and he said 4. So I'm not earmarking anybody. You're just going to be smoking cigars coming out of 4 companies instead of 164 companies. And compelled consolidation because of regulation is an anti-American sentiment. It is anti-capitalistic. Power shouldn't go to those that are writing the rules. And nobody in this industry wants to be regulated. The question is fairness. The question is the ability for everybody to stand on their own 2 feet, and no matter how big or how small you might be. And I think we've got a lot of people that are sympathetic to that message right now in this specific administration. And I'm not saying it couldn't happen in a future one, but we're dealing with political reality as it stands today. And I think there's a lot of people sympathetic to that economic argument at this particular point in time that's going to well serve this industry, hopefully in the next weeks and months ahead.
Hope so.
Amen. Armin,
Sure.
any final thoughts?
Yeah, the problem is with a guest like Glenn, how do you condense what you want to say in just a matter of seconds or a minute? But
Well, you got plenty of time, Armin. Go ahead, buddy.
yeah, no, everything that's been said over the past couple of hours, I mean, really resonates not only with Kerry and with Gabby, but with me and of course my partner Val, who's watching, because giving up your career and what you know best to get into an industry that you just have a passion for, and despite everything thrown at us, that we still want to forge ahead and persevere. And quite honestly, with everything thrown at us, that glimmer of hope has always been through you and the CRA. And of course, I have to mention Dr. Gabby and the BCA and what it stands for, and of course the reason for the involvement of myself and Val and DAV Cigars. After this, I think we all walk away a little bit more educated, and I hope our listeners have a better grasp of where we are in the industry and where we're headed. And I think we are fighting a good fight, and my hat's off to you, sir. I hope we can keep you on as long as we possibly can. I know Victor will be on our side, but there's still a fight to fight, and we all have to remain vigilant. And again, to reiterate that we all have a part to play in this. Nobody can be in this industry and remain on the sidelines if you really do expect positive change. So I remain cautiously optimistic. You can always count on us. We can use the podcast as a platform to get whatever message that we need to get across, and whatever else that needs to be done behind the scenes. So thank you again for all of your sacrifices that you do day in and day out. And I'm sure there's a lot you do that we're not aware of. So thank you for all of that. And we're behind you. And I'm sure together, with solidarity is the word that I like to use, we can get the job done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go to Gabby, then we'll go to Glenn for final thoughts, and then back to Gabby for final thoughts.
Did y'all get any cool questions roaming in? I didn't see any stream.
No, nothing really major. Just a lot of great comments. And Ishmael, we did go back and reread your messages throughout. I can't scroll through and read all of them, but we do understand that there was a miscommunication, that he was not criticizing you and the hard work that you've been doing, Glenn. I think there's just some misunderstanding with the messages that were going on. So I wanted to make sure that I pointed that out. And Carlito said, I lost 2 good movies with all of you. No regrets. I honestly believe that this has been the best virtual program I have ever witnessed. My best to all of you. We will fight this together for the pursuit of happiness. We are all one.
Thank you, Carlito.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
And we're still looking to have him on the show.
Yes.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to keep things short and sweet, and everything we've been discussing comes down to one thing, is that a great injustice is afflicted on the premium cigar industry. A great injustice is being imposed on all these family-owned and family-operated artisanal craft premium cigar makers, and a lot of our I think a lot of our a lot of the shit that we're dealing with has to do with all those tobacco products that literally target young people, that literally are the pinnacle of ideal nicotine delivery devices. And the FDA and some politicians have a huge misconception about our industry. And like I said before, the process to educate and make people aware of what our industry is all about. It's about families, it's about traditions, it's about history, it's about an artisanal craft. And we don't target minors. None of us literally produce a product targeting minors. We're like, if we were to say who our target market is, it's old farts that love cigars. That's who we target. I'm an old fart. I'm 40. I turned 49 the other day. I'm the guy that enjoys a cigar. I want to relax, and it's this great injustice that Glynn Loope, Cigar Rights of America, the PCA, has literally been fighting for the entire industry. Put the trade show aside. Look, I do want to say something about trade shows. What's that?
I'm glad you brought that up, but we'll do that in a second.
Yeah, trade shows are. People think that, oh, God, the PCA was canceled this year. Let me tell you guys something. Every trade show was canceled this year on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook had a massive trade show get-together, I think with 200,000 employees, I think somewhere in Orlando or somewhere. I'm still a licensed physician, right? I attend and continue to take continuing medical education courses. All medical conferences have been canceled.
Yeah.
They're limiting. Right now is not the ideal time to get 5,000 people in a convention hall hugging and kissing each other, guys. So for some reason, we have people in the cigar industry that think because the PCA show was canceled that's the end of the cigar industry. It's not.
Right.
We're dealing with a pandemic, guys.
I'm glad you brought that up.
There's a big oncology conference that was canceled. Doesn't mean that the research for a cure for cancer stops.
So with that said, is a huge injustice has been people. I don't know. People look at politics and the cigar industry like a 4th of July fireworks show. Like, no, man. It took a month to set up that fireworks show for you to see the lights and enjoy the show, but participate in setting up the show. Participate in voicing your opinions. Don't just contact your local congressman. Do that, but you know what? Get up off your ass and figure out how you can make a difference. It's not all about profits. We have to get through this in order for us to then discuss profits and how we can run our business. But how can you run a business when this great injustice is being inflicted upon the entire industry? It doesn't matter how big or small you are, we still face the same level of injustice, and we need to correct that. And that's what Glynn Loope represents, and you'll always be a part of my mind, my heart, my soul, the warrior in me to continue to fight for this industry and all the families that, no matter how big or small, every week we get phone calls. Hey, I'm interested in starting off a new brand. What do you recommend? And I'm thinking to myself, like, turn around and head for the hills. But I still guide people in the best way that I can with logic. Yeah. And logic tells me, like Armin says, we're cautiously optimistic that common sense will prevail and people will see that we're not like any other combustible tobacco product, which is the key question. It's the gold standard question. Mm-hmm. What separates us from every other tobacco product out there? The science demonstrates it. We tell it. We tell the stories. We have to explain it. I just don't accept that the burden of proof for substantial equivalence testing falls on us. Let the agency develop this amazing technique that works, and we know it doesn't. Like you said, it biologically doesn't exist. I've done the research to prove that scientifically it's not possible. Let them prove it, because if they make us go through this pathway and the entire premium cigar industry spends millions and millions of dollars trying to navigate a pathway that's impossible, and we all come to the same conclusion that we've been telling them that it's not possible, there's going to be another lawsuit coming. It's going to be a class action lawsuit against the FDA because they made us spend millions and millions of dollars on a pathway that we knew doesn't work. So with that said, Glynn Loope, I am your loyal servant. Well, you mean more to me and my family than I think you will ever know. My wife is a huge fan of yours, your family. We keep up to date with everything you do, your daughter does, your beautiful wife, God bless her, she's in our hearts. And I want to have this conversation 10 years from now when you're still at the head of Cigar Rights of America. So with that said, God bless my friend. Keep the good fight alive. No, let me tell you, man, advocacy works.
Yeah.
And we're advocating here live that Glynn Loope is an integral part of our industry, one way or another. So with that said, I thank you.
I appreciate all those kind sentiments. There's a few things that I want to get out before we finish. One, just because consumers don't pay all the bills doesn't mean we're not the voice of consumers. Getting 3 million cigar smokers to give over $25 is not the point. The point is galvanizing the consumer to be engaged politically. And we know that with our bounce rate and the base that we have between our distributions and those that the PCA does through cigaraction.org, we reach hundreds of thousands of consumers on a weekly and monthly basis to keep them apprised of what's going on politically. There is still so much to be done in that regard, but it's a partnership. It's a partnership between the consumer, the retailer, and the manufacturer. Two, I'm glad you brought up the trade show, because I just want to say this. PCA is more than a trade show. And you said that, but I want to reinforce that. It is a living, breathing organization like CRA is to serve this industry. And the advocacy work it does through its staff and consultants in collaboration with our staff and consultants has diligently served this industry because it believes the staff reports whether they're getting paid or not, mine and theirs. And the trade show is a project of the organization. It's a necessary tool for selling cigars, but it also brings us together. It brings us together. And when you add in the education component, when CRA and PCA are distributing information on SBA assistance during the pandemic, it's providing a service. When CRA and PCA galvanize its consultants to work the administration, it's serving this industry. When we facilitate hundreds of letters from members of Congress to an administration, it's serving this industry. And if that's not worth $250, $350 in dues, then you don't get it. True. I mean, the cost-benefit analysis is clearly there. The trade show stuff is going to work itself out in time, but that's not the know-all, be-all of the PCA. And hell, even if there wasn't a trade show for whatever reason, economics, logistics, attendance, we still ought to be coming together in the form of a convention every single year just to be together for the raw education, camaraderie, and exchange of ideas between us. That's what a living, breathing organization does, and that's what we're all doing today. And that is worth the dues to both organizations. 1, 2, pick it, heck, there ought to be regional, and there will be regional gatherings of state associations that are now coming together to reinforce the political message in every state capital in this country. This stuff is taken on an entire new dimension, and the level of sophistication that has been born out of the last decade between the organizations and between the leadership of these organizations is going to serve the interest of this industry long after we are all gone. And I believe that. So we got to get off this notion that a trade show is it in any way, shape, or form, because we don't know how 2021 is going to play out. But we know that this industry coming together to listen, to learn with each other is just as important as selling cigars. The selling of the cigars will happen. It will happen. And great cigars are still yet to be made. And they will be sold in one form or another. But the important part is to be together. And that's what these organizations are doing and are going to continue to do.
Amen.
Well said.
And I think earlier when Gabby and Glenn, you both said the same thing, and it's very true. When it comes to this environment, is you always have to keep the pressure on. The pressure never stops. So, in the words of Bill Parcells, after winning the Super Bowl, he said, "Success is never final. This is ongoing." So it's not one of those things where you're like, "Okay, well, we've completed this. Now we can stop." It is ongoing, fighting for our rights. As cigar brand owners, as consumers, as shop owners, everyone from soup to nuts, the love of the leaf, the love and the camaraderie that we all share over a cigar. You just got to keep fighting and support the groups that are fighting for all of us. It's just not, as Glenn said earlier, it's just not the big companies. It's just not the small companies. It is everybody who enjoys a great cigar. So I want to thank you, Glenn, for being on the show tonight. It was wonderful. I I'd also like to give a special shout out to Carlito Fuente for all the great comments and all the great statements and input throughout the show. He just put it here right now. So right one, so true. Every single word, Glenn. No one would or could have said it better. My hat off to you as always. So from here, protected.
Real quick, Gabby, we'll
Yes.
always have our moment on the park bench in front of the Capitol in Tallahassee.
I've got that photo. It's honestly quite memorable.
I know we keep trying to end, but I keep having these afterthoughts.
That's okay. Trust me, Glenn.
They're so bloody special, and if every retailer in America had a moment on a park bench in front of their own state capitol before they go in to talk to their governor's office, we'd be all the better for it.
Yeah.
Glenn, we've been doing this show for a while, so we've had about 10 wrap-ups already in the past. I think we had a 40-minute wrap-up last week.
Yeah, something like
For the
that.
40-minute final thoughts. My final thought. But all kidding aside, thank you very much. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. God bless. From Armin and Gabby and Viajante here at Protect the Legacy, we want to thank Glenn Loope for the Cigar Rights of America. Everybody, please go to the site, check them out. Support your local tobacconists. Support the industry. It's worth it. Everybody have a great evening. God bless, and we will see you next week.
Thanks for taking the time to join us this past hour. Our show is dedicated to preserving the boutique cigar industry. Federal regulations have put our entire industry in danger. With your support and sharing our message, we hope to educate and create more awareness about the craft and the art of making traditional premium cigars.